economic austerity was imposed by the IMF on over 100 countries during the pandemic.
My goodness.
Yes, over 100 countries were implementing austerity thanks to the IMF during the pandemic, exactly at the time when everyone was advising the countries of the South to build up their health systems, to strengthen their health systems with what?
Is the UN still a relevant space to advance women's rights at the global level? Yes, says Gita Sen, the legendary feminist political economist from India. She and her colleagues from the Global South Coalition on Sexual and Reproductive Health and Rights and Economic Justice have gone back to the UN in the last year to advance a different vision of the world. Join me in conversation with Gita to hear more. Welcome to the Famous Podcast. Today I have the immense pleasure of welcoming Gita Sen to our conversation. Gita and I have known each other for more than 25 years, I was counting. We work closely on many diplomatic negotiations at the UN on women's rights, on sexual and reproductive health and rights, on development and justice in New York, in Bangkok, in Geneva. And we also work together at several training programs for young activists. And we had a lot of fun doing it too. Gita is, but let me introduce her formally so that you know her background. She's a feminist political economist. She holds a PhD in economics from Stanford University in California. She was for a long time professor at the Indian Institute of Management in Bangalore, one of the most prestigious universities in India. And she was also an adjunct professor at the Harvard School of Public Health, which we've also heard about. She is currently honorary distinguished professor and senior advisor at the Public Health Foundation of India. Gita is the author of many important books and articles that have helped shape global thinking on women's rights, reproductive rights, and development, notably for me, the Yellow Book, Population Policies Reconsidered, Health, Empowerment, and Rights. Gita is a founding member of the Global South Feminist Network, DAWN, which means Development Alternatives with Women for a New Era. DAWN played a key role in advocating for the agendas of the International Conference on Population and Development in Cairo in 1994, as well as the Fourth World Conference on Women in Beijing in 1995. And Dawn also has played, and Gita is with it, a role in advancing these agendas globally, regionally, and nationally. She's worked closely with the UN agency UNFPA, the United Nations Population Fund, to make sure the paradigm shift that was achieved in Cairo at the International Conference on Population and Development towards sexual and reproductive health and rights and gender equality actually became a reality in that agency and with governments around the world. She's served multiple times as an advisor to the Indian delegation to UN negotiations on women's rights, development, and population, which is, of course, a huge platform from which to influence negotiations. So, you guessed it, she is a legend, she's a badass feminist, and she's a mentor to many. So, welcome, Gita.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's so much fun to have you here. Gita told me recently that after a few years where she was less present at UN negotiations for various reasons, she had decided to get re-involved about a little over a year ago. And that piqued my interest because obviously the UN is under attack these days. That's no secret. And its effectiveness and relevance are questioned by many. You know, it's the thing to say. What's the point of the UN? So why go back in? And at this particular time? But perhaps before we do that, we have to tell the audience why women's groups and feminist groups devoted so much time and energy to UN negotiations over the years. So we understand the decision making behind this.
Sure. So let me start with that second one first.
Yeah.
Because I actually, and Dawn's been in existence for over 40 years now.
Wow.
Started with the third women's conference, World Women's Conference in Nairobi in 1984.
Yeah.
And at the time, and this was actually my first sort of global UN conference, we were in the non-governmental forum. We knew that governments did something there, and that it might be of importance, but we were really much more focused on bringing women together, changing the ways in which we were thinking about development, gender equality, connections, etc. Didn't really pay that much attention to UN negotiations at that time, which is about 10 years before the ICPD and Beijing conferences. Fast forward to the early 90s. The early 90s, it became clear that we needed to move in from the margins of these conferences. We needed to move in from being, sitting in the NGO forum, talking to ourselves and to other civil society people, important as that was and continues to be, but that we could go for something much bigger and better. And I guess feminism made us smarter in the interim between Nairobi and Cairo and Beijing and Vienna, which was 1 year before the Cairo conference in 1993, which was the Vienna Conference on Human Rights as well. So part of what we did, and I might say that we collectively did it with great success, was to we actually succeeded in making a paradigm change happen. And the paradigm change of Cairo, in a nutshell, was to move the entire population field, the population and development field, away from sort of coercion, family planning as population control, towards human rights, gender equality, women's rights, and not least of all, adolescent health and rights. So the paradigm change of Cairo was to move away from population control numbers, top down, exactly, towards sexual and reproductive health and rights for all, but especially for women and girls, as well as gender equality, women's human rights, all put together. That paradigm change happened because we were smart, we were strategic, we learned very quickly. When we began preparing for Cairo and Beijing, very few of us knew anything about how UN negotiations happen. We learned quickly. We followed the famous inside-outside strategies. We had our people, feminists, inside government delegations, and they worked with us, and they worked with their governments to persuade them to come on board. with our agenda, to listen to our advocacy, to fight for us in those UN negotiations. Fast forward again. What followed after those conferences, UN conferences of the 90s, which were an expansive moment for gender equality, women's rights, and broadly for equality, justice, equity agendas, more broadly across the board, had to be then defended and, if possible, pushed forward. And this is what happened and what we were very engaged with over the next 15 or so years.
Right. Fighting the backlash, huh? Yeah.
Well, the backlash was weak, and then it got stronger and stronger.
Yeah.
Partly, I don't think the strength of the backlash is really because governments per se disagreed with a great deal of what we were saying. I think the geopolitical environment changed hugely in that period. Example, Russia had been a friend and supporter of the gender equality, women's rights agenda.
That's right.
In Cairo, Beijing, and so on. But Russia decided to ally themselves, and that's the only way I can think about it, with the Orthodox Church, Russian Church, which certainly was no friend of either gender equality or of women's rights. So geopolitical shifts kept happening. The US, of course, as we know, moved from the Clinton era to the to the Bush era, and then has been flip-flopping on the question of gender equality and women's rights and sexual and reproductive health and rights, depending on who's in power, the Republicans or the Democrats in the US. So this has been a back and forth struggle. And whenever I meet young people who sort of get disheartened by this, I say, hey, think a minute. How many years, decades, centuries, millennia do you think gender inequality has been with us?
Yes.
And how many years have we had Cairo and Beijing agendas?
Very progressive agendas, globally.
Exactly. Think about that. Think how far we got and have gotten in a very short time to overturn things that used to be seen as the norm, unchangeable. Think of where we are in terms of the growing recognition of unpaid care work in the world. Think of where we are in terms of the growing recognition of violence against women as not acceptable.
Right.
And so it will be like this. It's a battle. It isn't there, hasn't been there because nobody wanted it. There are those who prefer women to be subordinate. And
That's right.
who do not, who believe, whether because their religion tells them that women are secondary, or because they've interpreted their religion to be telling them that women are subordinate and secondary, or because they want to reinvent tradition to say the same kind of thing in their own self-interest.
Of course.
So we need to, this is a struggle, I firmly believe, that will go on, and we need to be strong to do that. Which brings me to your first question.
Why come back? Yeah.
Why go back?
Yes.
After struggling with it for this many years. I think an important reason we got back was the extent of the backlash and the risks coming from the totally unexpected resurgence of the right wing in the US and in across the world as well. And we felt that it's really across the world. We felt that it was really important to come back and to use what for women has been a fruitful and valuable space to hold our agendas.
Right.
Now, of course, this is a very different time from the early 90s or even the 2000s, whether it's in terms of the geopolitical environment, whether it's in terms of the strength of the backlash, whether it is in terms of the UN itself and the difficulties that multilateralism has been having. In all instances, it's become harder, tougher. But hey, there was somebody who I won't mention who said, when the going gets tough, the tough get going.
Right. That's
and
right.
I guess that's where we are
Yeah.
right now. And that's why we're back.
Yeah. And I mean, I know we kind of romanticize the 90s in some respect, but it was a pitched battle to change the paradigms away from population control and demographic targets to the idea that women have reproductive autonomy, or couples and men too, and adolescents have reproductive autonomy, and the government shouldn't dictate to you what you do with your body or try to influence what you do with your body in terms of reproduction, sexuality, and so on. The same with Beijing, the idea that women's rights are human rights and that women are full human beings, not second-class human beings. There was a big struggle. I mean, maybe there wasn't the full array of opponents that we have in front of us today, notably the US, which is a very powerful country. But it was tough, and it required this incredible organization of women's groups, feminist groups, and other alliances to really persuade governments that they had to change, their point of view.
Absolutely. I mean, now everything looks different in hindsight.
Right.
When we look at what we confront today, we think, oh my God, that was these golden years when we could do all these things. Well, yes, but we had to work really, really, really hard.
Yeah.
It was not easy.
No.
And we may not have had Russia opposing sexual rights as they do continuously in every forum, but we had the weight of tradition and norms working against us.
That's right.
And so, governments had to be educated, if I may say so. Governments had to be pushed by their own citizens, arguing that they needed to change and they needed to come on board. And there were powerful professional interests, like, for instance, the demographers, some of whom really saw what we were saying and were with us completely, but some who were not convinced that, yes, and who were really who had to be argued with, persuaded, negotiated with, etc. So I think that there were forces opposed to us. In fact, one of my funny stories from those days was that shortly before the Cairo Population Conference in 1994, we suddenly heard that there was a whole flurry of activity from the Vatican reaching out to key Islamic countries. So Vatican delegations were fanning out to Iran, to other countries in order to make common cause.
Wow.
And we used to say, yes, first time since the Crusades that they've decided to talk to them, come together. And if the power of the women's movement has been able to do that, then maybe we're doing something right here.
Yes.
After all.
More powerful than we know, right?
That's right. We're more powerful than we know.
Oh my
so
goodness.
I do think it was difficult. And this is a difficult moment, no question.
Sure.
About that.
Yeah.
But it's difficult in many ways, as we know, as the Free State of Montreal, as part of the Free
Republic
country of Canada, has discovered to its cost that realpolitik is back with us, as we know, much harder than under the earlier attempts by the neoconservatives and others to make realpolitik the center piece of foreign policy.
Yeah, pure power.
And that that makes things hard. But I firmly believe we will prevail.
Yes.
One of the reasons we will prevail is look at the young people.
Yeah. They're so brilliant. Yeah.
They're brilliant. They don't need to be persuaded about any of this. But also, very interestingly, because as part of our coming back, we've created this coalition.
The Global South.
The Global South Coalition on Sexual and Reproductive Health and Rights and Development Justice. Bringing the two together in a way that was always intended at Cairo is part of the Cairo Program of Action, but which in some senses had gotten watered down in the interim. And we are pushing to bring that back because we believe that that is the way in which we're going to broaden the tent under which many of those who actually believe in both SRHR and development justice and the right to development can come together. And there, in the 1 year that we've been working on this, it's an idea that catches fire like that.
Yeah. Can you say a bit more?
Especially in the Global South.
Yeah.
But even, allies in the Global North have begun to get it.
Yeah. Because if I think about Cairo, the conference in 1994, the role of Southern feminist groups was critical in ensuring that the agenda included issues of development, economic justice, environmental justice, not just reproductive autonomy, which might have been what Northern feminists were more interested in. And that was very powerful. But then you're right. After that, ultimately, the people who could be more present at the UN, who had the money to bring people for various negotiations over the years, tend to be the groups based in the global north. And they, plus the attacks from the religious right meant that the focus kind of shifted a little bit away from, or quite a bit away from economic justice, right, to reproductive autonomy, which is, of course, important. But I think, as you point out, the two have to come together. We can't talk about one without the other. And that's, I think, very exciting that you want to bring that full vision of Cairo back, right, to the agenda.
Absolutely. Let me give an example that will sort of bring it home really quickly for your audience.
Yeah.
The pandemic.
Oh my God, yeah.
COVID-19. What happened in COVID-19? One of the things that people tend to forget is how hugely unequal access to vaccines, diagnostic tests, protective equipment was across the world. Africa had very little. Other southern countries have very little. And vaccines were allowed to go past their expiry date in the go-downs and storage facilities of the north, just in order to ensure that the interests of big pharma in protecting their intellectual property rights and their right to charge whatever they pleased could be held. Now, the consequences in terms, well, that's one. And then austerity, economic austerity, was imposed by the IMF on over 100 countries during the pandemic.
My goodness.
Yes, over 100 countries were implementing austerity thanks to the IMF during the pandemic, exactly at the time when everyone was advising the countries of the South to build up their health systems, to strengthen their health systems with what?
Yeah. And while the northern governments were spending liberally on, measures to prop up the economy and small businesses and all that, right? I mean,
exactly.
Yeah. So that's a real contradiction and
it's
injustice.
Huge contradiction.
Yeah.
But what was the consequence of that? Cuts in health services. Among the first things, I mean, it was shocking to see antenatal care.
Yeah.
Programs for maternal health, access to contraception, programs for adolescent health. Those were the ones that were going down the tubes because the money was not there.
Right.
So the close connection between development justice and SRHR.
Yeah, women's health.
And women is absolutely there. If we don't recognize it and see how, in fact, we need to make these two aspects of human rights and justice work together, then we're doing ourselves and everybody else a huge disservice.
Yeah, the analysis is faulty then. It's not complete, right? I'm wondering why a global South coalition, because that's a deliberate choice of bringing together Southern feminists and Southern groups. And it's not that you don't want to talk to the Northern groups, but you wanted to be able to organize as Southern feminists. So what was the imperative there?
Yeah. I think the imperative is exactly the development justice piece.
Yeah.
When we talk about it among Southern groups, they get it like this.
Right.
Because they know that's what's going on. Health and education systems are getting privatized and falling apart. And how on earth do we push sexual and reproductive health and rights agenda in that context? So they get it like that. It's the reason for the South, being centered in this coalition is the lived realities. The lived realities are exactly that, because we got these questions from all of the global and northern groups and so on, saying, aren't we your allies? And our response is, yes, you can be. Absolutely. We would love to have you as our allies, provided you get this central point that we're making and can then work to change how your governments view these issues.
And behave.
Then we can be real partners in doing this. So that's the reason. It's bringing together the lived realities, the advocacy, and
develop the agenda, without having to. And Northern feminists need to go and educate themselves if they don't get it at this point, right? I mean, it's on them.
Exactly.
It's on them to, the information is there, the studies are there. You can find out why economic justice is critical to women's rights if you haven't figured it out already. But you don't want to have to carry that load, they.
No, we're happy to talk to them to discuss. We are completely respectful of the work of our partners in the North.
Right.
Without that, we wouldn't be able to hold the SRHR agenda or to have held it in all the years that we've held it. It's the combination of North and South that has held it. And we need to look at that alliance through a fresh lens, so to speak.
You're patient. And strategic.
And strategic.
Yeah. And let's talk, the last point I wanted to talk about is another issue that's very big on the UN agenda, which is UN reform, partly driven by the big cuts in contributions, notably the US, which is delinquent, $2.2 billion they owe the UN, which then have no intention of paying, I gather. We don't pay our bills. And one of the proposals of this UN 80, reform agenda is to merge two of the UN agencies that are of particular concern to women's rights and feminists, which is UNWomen, the agency that was created to advance the women gender equality, and the United Nations Population Fund that we mentioned earlier, which works on sexual and reproductive health and rights, provision of contraceptives, and so on. So, what is the position of the Global South Coalition with respect to this idea of merging? Sounds good in theory, efficiencies and savings, and, in a time of scarcity and austerity, don't we have to be more reasonable, et cetera, et cetera? What has been the Global South Coalition's position on this?
I think, first of all, I would just say, why do we have to be the ones who always have to be reasonable?
Yes, right?
We're always the ones who are first asked, be reasonable,
Women,
girls.
yeah, sit down.
Yes. But more seriously, I think our position is we need to really assess seriously the pros and cons and importantly, the risks of such a merger at this time. We've raised a bunch of these risks, because everybody talks about as though, you can just take two behemoths and sort of mush them together and then, it will all be sweetness and light. It's nothing like that. There's huge risks involved. The UN has said we will not allow a watering down of mandates. Our question is a risk. There is a huge political risk to changing the structure of UN agencies and entities in the middle of this political environment.
Right.
And gender equality and women's rights could be hugely at risk if you open up those mandates, which, regardless of what the UN at the highest level may say, that they don't want the mandates to be opened, it's the member states that own the UN.
Mm-hmm.
And if there are member states who want to open up the mandate, it doesn't matter who at the top of the UN says they're going to protect the mandates. They will have to go along with it. So there's political risk.
Yeah.
There's a financial risk. Everybody thinks, the UNFPA, the Population Fund's budget is something like $1.6, $1.7 billion
a year.
UN Women's budget is about a third of that. It's about 0.6 billion or a bit more than that. Nobody should imagine in today's climate of cutbacks, of huge increases in military expenditures, whether we're talking about across the board in the North and in the South as well, that there will not be a temptation among governments to say, let's reduce.
Mm-hmm.
We bring these together. Otherwise, there would be, where's the question of economic efficiency in bringing these together if we can't cut back?
That's right.
So there will be less money as a result of such a merger.
Mm-hmm.
And the biggest challenge is the programming on the ground. I know, because I work on the ground in country. I'm based in India, and I've always, been for almost all of my working life. UN Women and UNFPA are two different entities.
Yes.
Their staff are different. Their skill sets are different. UN Women's role, heavily normative. UNFPA's role is normative, but also programmatic.
Yeah. Yeah.
Provision of services.
Yeah.
Provision of contraception. Support for exactly making sure things move to the ground level. You can't just say, oh, they both work on gender equality, and so we bring them together. The fourth very important thing, UNFPA is not primarily an organization for women and girls. That's simply not correct. Population is about everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And the population funds work. Certainly the priority for women and girls has been, and women's human rights has been a very important corrective to what was there before, but it includes everyone. Adolescents.
Yes.
Young men.
Yes.
Boys.
Mm-hmm.
All of that is part of the UN Population Fund's work. Right. And it can't be just sidelined.
Yeah.
Yes, that would be a huge loss and an injustice.
Yeah.
If that were to happen. So these risks have really, we feel, to be seriously considered before any such merger. And we should be looking at alternatives. Why only the question of merging UNWomen and UNFPA? Are there other alternatives? And we understand there haven't been any other alternatives that have been seriously.
No scenarios. Yeah.
No scenarios that have seriously been put forward or looked at. These are questions that civil society has been raising through this process, but a lot of member states are raising them as well.
Right.
Interestingly, we understand Russia does not support a merger.
Wonder why.
Nor does China, for that matter.
Yeah, China, I understand, but Russia, interesting.
Does not support a merger. Their own reasons, no doubt, but they don't support a merger. The G77 does not really support a merger, is my understanding.
So all the countries from the global south.
But also a lot of the funders, the countries from the global north, Germany,
not in favor.
The UK, Canada, Sweden.
So yeah, we need to sit down. Yeah,
Right.
yeah. And so the global
the UN
south
needs to listen
to countries saying this isn't how it works on the ground. And the
to
Global
countries
South
just-
Coalition has had a big role in making countries aware of the dangers, right? That's been one of the
Global
things.
South Coalition certainly played an important role, but so did others. There's a coalition of coalitions that's been working on this as well, and they've done a great job. Force Feminista has produced some very valuable analysis.
Yeah.
So we've all been working, coming from different angles, working together to say, don't push this without seriously looking at risks, real risks, alternatives, and what is it that we would actually gain? What would be best to move the needle for gender equality and women's rights?
Yes. Yes.
That's what we need to be looking at.
That's right. That's the North Star.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for this. And in closing, Gita, is there, and now we can see why it's so important that you got back in, right? These issues are incredibly important. They require all our best thinking. Is there something, in the next few years that the coalition or you personally is hoping can be achieved at the multilateral level at the UN? Beyond just, shaping UN 80, this reform, which sounds like you're well underway, but is there room for action that builds and creates rather than just stopping damage and, and preventing austerity and foolish decisions?
I think actually the agenda of the coalition is exactly that. It's not a short-term agenda. We know the forces we face on the ground, and we also know the forces we face outside the health and human rights field. Austerity and the shrinking of fiscal space, hard lines on country sovereign debt is not coming from the health agencies.
No.
And it's coming from the highest levels of economic governance.
Mm-hmm.
And that needs to change. And that agenda, which often, sadly, promotes as well the privatization of everything in support of private corporate interests.
Right.
That needs to change.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a long haul agenda. But it's an agenda that, as you know, a feminist from the South, that's been Dawn's agenda from the get-go.
Mm-hmm.
But we're trying to say that, look, women's bodily integrity and autonomy on the one side, and these agendas of development justice actually belong together.
Right.
They're completely imbricated.
Yeah.
And we've seen that through what's happened in the last 30 years or so,
Yes.
since these conferences in the 90s. We can go only so far and no further. And right now, with the kind of poly-crisis scenario that we're in, we know that these agendas have to come together.
Mm-hmm. And you feel
we haven't even talked today about the whole climate change.
No, that's right. That's
issue.
Also, critical
Yeah.
to address
That's
holistically.
Right. But
you can't, leave it over there. Mm-hmm.
That's right.
Yeah. No, that's so it's a long road, but at the same time, I hear in what you're describing a sense that this has much more traction than maybe it did in the past, because a lot of people get it now, especially the younger generations. They make the connections in ways that perhaps, we didn't, or it was harder to get us to do that in some respects. Like the whole issue of climate change now, young people are very attuned to. Privatization is on the agenda in ways that maybe it wasn't as fully on the agenda in the past. I mean, you all, Dawn got it, years ago, but not every part of the feminist movement made all the connections. And I feel you're right that it's got more traction and people get it more quickly.
I think the South within the North got it very quickly.
Yeah.
As well. If one looks at minority communities, African American groups, they've understood this very early because they know it's lived realities.
Right.
Lived realities matter hugely. And partly what's happening is that the lived realities of the North are changing.
Right. Exactly.
And have changed. And that's partly the reason why there's more traction, I think, for these ideas. Definitely in the South, but even
in the North, for sure.
In the North,
increasingly.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Gita, for this brief explanation of why you're back at the multilateral level and at regional and global level. I'm really glad you are.
I must be crazy.
Yes, you're a masochist of major proportions, but I'm really glad you're back. And I'm sure I'll see you on the roads of feminism and activism in the next few months as we amp up, the work around UN negotiations. I'll pop in for sure and hear how it's going. But thank you for these insights, and a luta continua.
Absolutely, and thank you, Françoise, for having me. It's been a pleasure to
always
talk again.
Oh yes, always. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.